Hey there, everyone. Hope you're doing very well. Welcome back to the class here. We are back for class 2 of our first week with the new online protocols here. So we're going to jump in here in a couple minutes and talk about some of the inventions of the period. We'll hear a book talk in particular about what the light bulb brought to human life in general, and talk a little bit about the challenges of the industrial world that was being created. So, just to talk off the top here, I wanted to mention that so since we pushed back the dates on the various various aspects of the course for weeks 10 through 12, we bumped those back a week. We'll do exam 2 beginning today. So after our typical course time, or depending on when you're watching this, on Wednesday, depending on the end of that course period is when you'll be able to access the exam. So we'll run it like we are having normal class, just so that there's a specific beginning and end time. And so it'll be due a week from this Wednesday. It'll be due the next Wednesday. So be paying attention to that. I'll be getting that opened up here shortly. So that's about it. So be digging into what we're doing today. If you haven't had a chance to get to Mondays yet, do that. And then today's, and then you'll be ready to tackle exam 2. And we'll move on from there. So anyway, hope you have a good rest of the week, and we'll catch you later. We'll jump in here to what we're talking about with all of the inventions of the era. And it's hard to summarize it. Really, you can talk about different areas of invention, different the focus of different types of inventions. But really, you can look at it in one way that you can look at it is efficiency and quality. They're the things that they're trying to accomplish are, have been unthinkable previously. Instantaneous communication with a telephone up to your ear. Be able to talk to somebody, from a distance is just amazing. Or the use of the typewriter. All these things are part of this era. The 1890s, so looking toward the end of the century that we're talking about here, but up through the 1890s, it was an era of invention. And by the 1890s, you're seeing some 235,000 inventions registered with the U.S. Patent Office. Just an explosion of creativity and invention, and then people iterating on other inventions to make their own. It was just an enormous amount of effort being put into those things. And some of those, the types of inventions that are coming out. One that I mentioned is the refrigerated rail car. So previously I talked about the meatpacking industry coming out of Chicago. And you can think about that. And if you have a bunch of meat that's been processed and is in, rail cars headed to the Northeast, then you're looking at a situation where, okay, well, we've only got 24 hours before those spoil. Or maybe we can salt the meat and then ship it that way. Or like people have done for centuries, or maybe use some kind of curing process or something like that. But before the invention of refrigeration and refrigerated rail cars, getting meat and other products that might spoil over long distance, several days, could be dangerous, especially in warmer times of the year. And so the addition of refrigerated rail cars to the rail network that is being developed in the United States is a huge bonus to the food industry. And so that's a really big deal. To extend the lifespan of goods getting to market is pretty huge, and it really changes the calculations of both farmers and distributors of food, trying to figure out how they're going to get that to the right places before it spoils. That's always part of that calculation. So adding refrigeration is a big deal, and then that's going to lead itself into refrigerators. Home refrigeration is going to be coming out of this. That you won't see like GE refrigerators just yet. Those will be more towards the 1940s, 1950s is when you start to see more and more of those conveniences coming into the homes. But that's part of this process. Being able to mill grain in mass using rollers, much more large scale grain processing becomes part of this era. You start, and along with that, you start to see a lot of the major companies that we tend to think of today. You like Pillsbury company that makes various baking products, or you might have bought some biscuits from them and previously. That those types of companies get their start in this era. Steam turbines, being able to create power off of steam. We'll get to electricity and those sorts of things here in just a little bit. Typewriters, being able to effectively produce typed text was amazing. People have been able to print for a long time now. Print type text. Print text. You could you have typesetters. People who would use little block letters that could be put into a form. You could put all those letters into it, and they would design newspaper pages that way. And you could set, you were a typesetter. That was an actual job. But for a person to be able to sit down at a desk and use their fingers to type onto a piece of paper, and it was repeatable over and over and over like that, and then people get quicker and quicker at it, that is a revolution in itself in communication, because then it just opens up whole new avenues of how text and letters and all sorts of communication are sent, and the speed with which they're sent. It's really an amazing thing. And if you look down below this video, you'll see one video for it's relatively short, like a few minutes long, but it goes to a video about the development of typewriters and how they sort of grew in functionality over time. You get to see the changes in those, and it's a neat thing to get to see. Just make sure I covered the things. The vacuum cleaner gets its start in this era. That's one other one, but also the one of the biggest in communication is the telephone, and it starts off relatively small. So it's a slow growing type thing. Anytime you start out with inventions like these, they are always relatively expensive, and they'll begin with companies, corporations, bringing them on board, and then start to make their way into more wealthy homes and on down through society that way. That tends to be the way it goes, but they get their start. This was the era of, and will be for a long time, the era of the switchboard. The person, it was an actual job. You're a switchboard operator, and it was often a job that women filled for a good bit of the history of the switchboard. Was that the person would be sitting in front of a board with lots of little holes all in it. I should try to find a video for that later, but and if I can, I'll link it below. Look for that. But a person would sit there, and they would have a panel of these various plugs on wires in front of them, and then they would have a panel of holes in front of them, and then they would take the call and hear it in their heads, and then they would connect that call from their panel down here up to there, and that would make physically making that connection. And it's kind of hard to imagine that these days, just the way everything is so instant. But it was even though it was instant, it was still a very human thing making that connection, and is a challenge. And you can imagine the people used to pay a lot more to call long distance, and that came out of an era when there was a real human cost, an added human cost for that call to go further and further and further. You're tying up lines farther and farther, and so there's a reason that long distance actually cost more, and then later there was no real reason for that, but that was part of life at the time. And then the big name the person associated with invention in the mid to late 1800s is Thomas Edison. His invention house that he created was responsible for a number of inventions. Storage batteries, so actually being able to store energy on a limited scale, but still being able to do that was impressive. Dictaphone, mimeograph, these are communication recording devices. Electric motor, so a motor that was run off of electricity rather than, say, coal or steam. Electric transmission, so electricity, and motion pictures. But most famously was the light bulb. 1879, the development of the light bulb. Oh, and I forget the phonograph, 1877. So recording and then reproducing sound through wax, later vinyl recording is a huge step forward in being able to record the human voice and then reproduce it. That's an amazing change at this time. So there's just so much exciting stuff. You can imagine being alive at the time, and through the 1880s, late 1870s, the 1880s, and then the 1890s, just every week something new and exciting is happening, and you're reading about it in the newspaper. What's going on? So much new things are happening. It's really, really, really neat. 1882, the Edison Electric Illuminating Company was founded, providing electricity to 85 customers in New York. And this is where you get the beginning of the electric utility industry. I'm sure you pay an electric bill every month to keep your lights on and at your house. And that's where this started, was with this beginning of providing electricity to customers. They go through a battle between Edison and Westinghouse, determining whether the battles should be AC versus DC. One of the students in the class is doing a project on that, so I won't go too far into that, but it is really, really interesting, the links that they went to try to dominate and decide which way that electricity would be delivered. And ultimately, AC wins out, and they're able to develop motors that go along with it. And so this booming world of electricity starts to change industry as well. So companies can rely on electricity rather than coal and water and other things like that. So now they can move even further away from the need for these commodities like coal. They can be located anywhere, they can be powered, their industry can be powered, and it really changes the dynamics of how work is done and how life is lived. And it's really, really fascinating to see how all of this comes together. But yeah, Edison himself is an interesting person. So what he did, he established a research group, this house of invention. So he brought on people, he was the leader of it, but he brought on people to do the work. And because if you need to test 1,000 different filaments that could serve as the piece in the middle of the light bulb, an incandescent light bulb that lights up, you need a number of people doing those tests and figuring out what works, what doesn't work. And he brought on a group of people to do that. So he creates this sort of research house, a research group to do that kind of work. And that in itself is a revolution, because that's what R&D groups do today. A lot of companies, GE, 3M, the big ones, have their own in-house research groups. And this is the beginning of that era. And so, but what's more interesting, even more so than the person himself, is what the invention itself does. And I thought that you'd benefit from seeing that. So there's a little bio in the videos below. You'll see a bio about Edison, quick bio, and also a quick little blurb about the light bulb. But then what you can jump into The Age of Edison, which is a book talk by a writer who talks about how crucial the light bulb was, and not so much about Edison, but the age of Edison. Like, what did this invention do for the world? And I'm running out of time. 1 second.